All right, welcome back to part 2 of our video series here on selecting a rifle scope. Again, find yourself looking for what rifle scope should I buy, what's important and what's not. And that's what we're going through here. We went through some of the beginning process that Roger and I here go through when we're trying to pick a scope for a particular rifle. Again, this is Roger, a good friend. He's a firearms expert and knows a lot about not only firearms but the scopes and everything from long range shooting up down to just your basic shooting. So asked him to come join me, and thanks for joining me here today, Roger. Glad to have you again.
Glad to be here.
So for this part, we're going to go over some of the physical features that you see in these different scopes. There's obviously, we got quite a few here, and everything from low end to high end here. So some of the things that you're going to see on these scopes, starting off with a basic Nikon here, you've got capped turrets. So you basically just set, unscrew those and set them to where you want them, and then get dialed in to where you're at. Now others, like this Bushnell Forge, and I think the only other one here is this Track Toric right here. This guy has a locking locking turret system. So you pull that up, and then you're able to dial in where you want, and then it does have a zero stop, which we'll talk about more, and then you lock it back down. Same on the windage. So a couple have those. Those are kind of nice for hunting. We'll get into that here in a minute. The other ones here, both the Athlon, the Leupold, the Steiner here, I believe has covered turrets. We'll talk about that in a second. The SIG and the Bushnell Elite Tactical, they all have turrets that they have the zero stop, which again we'll talk about that in a second, but they don't lock into place as far as the elevation. And some of these have windage turrets that do. So some different features, there's just a lot of variations you can get through in here. So. A lot to talk about. We'll try to be as quick as we can here so it doesn't get too long. But
yeah, you can get into, I don't know, Leopold got a nice one with their zero lock system. So it's a locking turret.
Push that button.
Yeah. And it's also a zero stop. So I think you either got to have one or the other.
Right.
Having both is really nice. The track, nice having a zero stop and a locking turret. Same with the Bushnell.
And on the side, locking windage and elevation. That is nice.
Yeah, because it never fails, right? Murphy always pops his ugly head up every once in a while on the field. I ran a VX5 last year with a zero lock turret, their CDS CL2 dial. And I liked it because it is, you have to push in that button to unlock it, but I actually did unlock it, carrying it slung, and I didn't know it.
Right.
So it's always nice, even though you have those kind of redundancies, to always check before you do anything, because I unslung it and I looked and I was like, oh, be dang, it was a half a revolution just carrying it on my side. It was able to work its way loose. Which is kind of nice about a cap turret system that you can spin off. I know some of the like the Night Force ones, the Steiner one. It's got a capped turret that you can obviously twist off within a few seconds and still be able to dial, which is nice. It doesn't have a zero stop and it doesn't have a zero lock, which you don't really need a lock because it's got the capped turrets. It doesn't have a zero stop, which on a zero stop it's basically like this one or the Track. After you get done zeroing your optic to wherever distance you want and everything, you can pop the turret off, set it, and different turrets zero a little bit differently, but standard is you either use shims or, like that one's probably got a built-in, you just pop you pop the turret off, set it to zero, screw it back on. I know this Leopold one, 3 screws, pops off, turn it back to zero, set it down, 3 screws, and it's zero stopped and zero locked. So you can always go, if you don't know what revolution you're on, especially these longer shots where you're going up multiple revolutions. Crap, am I up 2 revolutions or am I 1? So you don't know, you can zip it all the way back down, which is handy to have.
So when we're saying zero stop, I guess we should stop for a second and say what that is. Basically, wherever you've zeroed your rifle, you want to come back to that every time. So that's where a locking turret comes in really handy, and the zero stop. So if you let's say you've turned it a whole bunch of revolutions, like you said.
What is that, 20 minutes?
20 minutes.
That's a long ways.
It's a long ways. So, and then you can come right back, and there's a washer inside here, and some of them are different, like the Leopold's a little different, but it won't go past zero to less than zero, and then you can lock that back in place. I think the Zeiss has that. All of these do the SIG, the 2 Bushnells, the Leupold, and then the Athlon here also has that where it locks or it goes back to 0 and you can't mess that up.
But having a 0 stop and a return to 0 type of a scope that you can go, it's money. I really do like it because inevitably you're, you know, that one's got 20 minutes of adjustment on a revolution, and there's not a whole lot of people that are going to come up 20 minutes of adjustment.
Long ways.
You know, you got into this. These are in mils, but I know those are minutes. Yeah, so you're coming up. What is that? 15?
Yeah.
14? 15 minutes. So that's doable, and I know these turrets will only come up 1 revolution, so you're fine there. But some of the other ones, they're ZL2s or ZL3. You're going to go up multiple revolutions, so it's nice to know which revolution you're on.
Now some, like this guy here, this is the Zeiss V4. You don't have a locking elevation. You have the 0 stop, but it doesn't lock. But the windage turret here does lock, so you have to pull that out before your windage moves.
Nice. Yeah.
Because the reality is your windage turret is probably going to be the one that's more likely to get bumped than your elevation turret.
Right.
So for hunting situations, that's a real nice setup. If you don't have that locking elevation turret, a lot of these do have a locking windage turret, so that's something to consider.
And that one's capped too. So
Yeah.
A lot of the Vortex or the Leupold lines will have a capped windage and an exposed elevation turret, which is nice because most of the time, like I mentioned in the other one, I like to hold wind, dial for elevation, and hold wind. So a lot of times after I 0 it, I'm not messing with the windage turret.
Yeah. It's use it a lot less than the elevation turret, for sure.
Yeah, I know there's some guys out there that like to, they just have, I guess, a mental block holding the crosshairs off of center, so they want to dial their wind. But the wind's changing so much that I like to hold it rather than dial it, because you're like, oh, did I have 5 minutes in, or did I have 4 minutes? Too much for me.
So what about another physical feature here? Let's talk about the objective size.
Okay.
Obviously we've got 40 millimeter up
40.
to, that's 40, and this is 40, the Leupold and the Nikon, up to that monster of a 56 millimeter Athlon Cronus there. So obviously you're going to get more light gathering with the 56 than a 40.
Well, it really depends if everything relative. If they offered this scope, and I'm not terribly familiar with it, if they offered this, so this is a 4.5 to 14 by 40 in a 30 millimeter tube. If this same scope 4.5 to 14 was in a 44 or 50 millimeter tube, you're going to have a little bit more light coming in. But the light is more subjective to your exit pupil. So exit pupil is you take your objective divided by your power. So if you want to know what your exit pupil is at 4.5 power, take 56 divided by 4.5, and you got your exit pupil. But at was it 29? 56 divided by 29, your exit pupil is going to be small.
Real small.
And where that comes into play is low light situations when the human eye will dilate and constrict with different lighting conditions. So when it gets low light, your pupils are going to want to get bigger to let more light in. So it'll generally be between 5, 5.5, 7 in that low light range. But if your exit pupil is 2, that's smaller than your pupil is, so you're not going to get any more light letting in than your exit pupil. So that's why a lot of times you got to dial down on your scope to get that exit pupil to be
big enough,
big enough to let enough light in. So,
and that's also going to come into play. I've noticed in playing with a bunch of these scopes and taking them out in the range of shooting, it affects your face and eye placement, eye relief as well. So it seems like you lose eye relief when you go to the higher magnification, and it becomes a way more finicky to keep that centered. And that's when having something like this Boyd stock or a stock pack or something on there to make sure your alignment is perfect on every time you get down on the gun.
And that kind of goes to mounting them too. Is a lot of people will mount these scopes, down at 4.5 power. They'll set their eye relief and go, oh man, everything's good, and they'll go out and try to 0 their scope, and then they always seem to crank it down, and they're like, man, I can't see, and you gotta really suck in. So I like to mount my scopes either all the way at full power or half or something like that, so you kind of have a happy medium to where you're not too close at low power, you're not too far away at high power. So it really, but that's one big mistake that I see a lot of people do is they don't mount it at high enough power.
I've never done that. Don't worry about it. So what's a happy medium, just for folks watching, for a let's say your average guy that's maybe 400 or 500 yards max, probably more like 300 to 400. Do you need a larger 56? Are you good with a 40? What do you think?
Yeah, for me personally, on something like that, a lot of it depends too on what kind of rifle you're mounting it on, right? So if you got an adjustable cheek piece like some of these, like the Boyds and this Graybow stock, you can mount this scope however high you want. You can always adjust this to get your cheek placement on. But when you got a fixed stock like this, when you got a big 56 millimeter objective, you have to mount that thing high because you don't want it to contact your barrel.
Right.
So when you mount that thing high, then pretty soon you got a chin weld instead of a cheek weld on your stock because it's so high you're not able to get behind it properly. So having a 44 or 40 millimeter objective like that, this is obviously mounted a little bit high. Just I know that's what you had at the time to mount it, but you can mount that so much lower with a lot of these old traditional stocks. That's where you have to have it. You can't really set it, big 56 that low to get behind the scope properly. So a lot of it's dependent on your equipment and what you're using. If you got an adjustable stock, sky's the limit because you can always adjust your cheek piece up. You can get stock packs for these to adjust that, and I have, but it sure is nice to have adjustability that you can move it
especially if you have multiple people shooting the gun, where you can adjust not only the cheek height and
everybody's face is going to be built a little different.
So if you're the only one shooting the gun, sure, get the length of pole perfect for you and whatnot. But if you're not, then that's kind of handy.
100%. Your standard 40, 44. I like that 44 to 50 range.
For an objective size?
Right, for an objective size. Pretty much all of my rifles have an adjustable cheek piece, so that doesn't bother me as much. If you're going to have a Monte Carlo stock like this, that 40, that's a good scope for that type of rifle. 40 millimeter objective, you can really sink that thing down low and get it where you want it on that cheek.
Right. All right, another thing you'll see when you're looking through different rifle scope specs are the size of the tubes. Most of these are 30 millimeter tubes, and that's that's a good standard, if you will. But there's also some that, like this Nikon, is a 1-inch tube, and more folks are making that because a lot of folks like that in a hunting scope. And then this guy is a 34, so it's bigger than. There's even some 36s out there. I've seen some really big ones. What does the tube do as far as how much does it affect the optical quality? Not to get too much into that because that's our next video, but why go with a bigger tube versus a 30 millimeter or a 1-inch?
With the tube sizes, you're going to probably get a little bit more field of view, and a lot of people think, the bigger tube, you're going to have more light coming through and everything, but generally people will put 1-inch like erector systems and lenses in a 30 millimeter tube just to get a little bit more elevation, gain adjustment out of and stuff. So you're going to have more room for your erector system to go up and down, your turrets, your dials to get more out of it. So it's not necessarily, and it really depends scope to scope, manufacturer to manufacturer, but traditionally, and you can almost bet that from a 1-inch to a 30 millimeter tube, you're going to get more elevation adjustments out of it. From 30 to 34, you're going to get even more. And if they do it right and they actually do 30 millimeter lenses and stuff, then you can get more light gathering.
Sure.
And bigger field of view with a bigger tube, but
they get heavier though, isn't there? 34 millimeter tubes,
because it's all glass, right? You're putting bigger glass in there, you're putting more glass in there, so it's going to end up weighting it down a little bit. But for most people, you're not going to need your standard 30 millimeter tube, which is for number's sake, 80 minutes of adjustment for your erector system. So that's from the very bones bottom to the top, you're going to get 80, and most of the time people are going to zero it, and your best optical quality is going to be in the middle. So from 20 to 60, we'll say, just for numbers wise, that's going to be your best optical quality. And any less than that or any more than that, you're going to start getting in towards the edge of your lenses, which you're going to start getting some varying degrees of quality. Let's just say that. So the best is to kind of stay in that medium range. But if you're not, for a Nikon 3 to 9, if you're setting it and forgetting it, you don't need all that
yeah.
erector system, so it doesn't
Right.
matter. So, you know, to get a 30 millimeter tube or
Mhm.
34 millimeter tube, if you don't need it, you don't need it.
Right.
But if you're going to be shooting out to a mile, you're going to need all the adjustments that come with a 34 millimeter tube because you're going to run out.
Right, exactly.
You know, I crunched some numbers. So for my short mag over here, out to about 1,300 yards, I'm going to need 40 minutes of elevation gain. So if my scope can't do that,
right.
So if you're setting it in the middle of, say, an 80, you know, if you don't have a, you know, we'll get into this later, but the elevation on their bases and stuff like that, you can't. If you start off in the middle, say at 40, I won't be able to get that high.
Right.
Generally, you're not going to be right at the 40. I might be at 45, 50
Right.
minutes. You know, in the internal adjustments, I won't be able to go up high enough to get to that distance. So it all depends on how far you're going to shoot. If you're only going to go out to 600 yards and that's going to be your ultimate max, you know, you're not going to need all that adjustment.
Right, right. So probably for the majority of folks, your 30 millimeter tube or 1 inch tube is going to be
100%.
plenty.
Yeah, 10 years ago, you know, it was hard to find 30 millimeter tubes or, you know, 30 millimeter scopes, and you definitely couldn't find a whole lot of 30 millimeter accessories as far as rings and bases and everything else.
Now it's like
nowadays 30 is kind of the norm.
34s
are harder finding, and even 1 inch. People turn their nose up at 1 inch tubes. They're like, oh man, it's thing of the past. But there still are a lot of uses for a 1 inch rifle scope. So.
All right, now next physical feature that I'm seeing a lot of out there is the illuminated reticles, and a bunch of these have that, and a couple of them don't. Traditionally, in the past, I hadn't used illuminated reticle very much, but I've gotten a few here that have that now. So like the Athlon Coronis has an illuminated reticle. This particular loophole does not, although they make some that do. The Sig Tango 4 does have an illuminated reticle. The two Bushnells, the Elite Tactical and the Forge here, do not, and of course the Nikon doesn't. That's a basic scope. The Zeiss Conquest does, as well as the Tractoric and the Steiner here. So kind of a wide variety here. As we kind of were chatting a minute ago about, pros and cons of an illuminated reticle in a hunting situation.
Yeah, and we'll always start this conversation with check your regulations, check your hunting regulations, your laws in your state and your area. Some states might not allow any type of electronics that's in your system. If you take the battery out, I've had game officers say you can't even have a scope mounted on your gun that have the ability to have that. So just don't even buy one if it's not legal in your state. So just that disclaimer on this discussion. And that's too bad too, because I really do like the illuminated reticles. I'm personally more of a fan for a hunting situation of an illuminated reticle that's kind of basic. I know my Steiner just has the center cross that's illuminated, so it's not busy. Some of these Christmas tree type of reticles for all your holdovers, if that whole thing lights up, then it could get a little busy, especially if you're trying to shoot at an animal in low light situations. If you're target shooting, and you got that thing,
And most of these do have adjustments here for the how bright you want that to be, which is kind of nice.
And I like a illuminated reticle. Looks like this Athlon on my Steiner. And the track does too. That in between each of the intensity levels, there's an off.
Right, so you can go
portion. So you don't have to go all the way from 0 all the way up to 11 or whatever. You can, put it between 8 and 9 and shut it off there. That way you're just a quick twist and it's on. I do really like it for low light situations. It really helps you get on target and see what you're aiming at, I guess.
Now, like you said, there's varying degrees of illumination is in the sense of what in your reticle is illuminated. The Athlon, I believe, all of the whole reticle, they have, of course, a bunch of different reticles you can select with different patterns and busyness and whatnot. So all of that illuminates. I believe all of the SIG illuminates as well. The same with the tract on the Steiner.
It's just a little,
the cross.
There's a center cross post.
And then on the Zeiss as well, it's just the center dot is illuminated, which is really quite nice. So it's a personal preference thing. You kind of have to experiment and see what you like.
Really, 90% of the time you're never going to use it, but that 10% of the time, like this last bear season where I had to chase a wounded bear down in some nasty thick stuff in fading light, it was really nice to have.
Absolutely.
My buddy's bear wasn't mine.
You didn't.
I didn't.
No.
I didn't.
We won't name names. We won't name names. Right. So
no, it's a good feature, and if it's generally going to add about $100 to a scope, depending if you were to get it with or without illumination. But I think it's way worth it.
Yeah, yeah. And then just real quick before we get to the next part here, as you can see, a lot of these scopes we've got levels on here. I'm a huge fan of levels.
It's a must-have.
You know, whether it's an external mount like that or something like that's on this Zeiss here. The Zeiss rings come with the integrated level, which is really, really nice. They're expensive, but really nice. But no matter what you do, like this one, your gun here has a level in the stock, which is
a great
really
little Phoenix
nice.
stock. It's got it integrated into it, which is nice. Either way you do it, 100%. A level is needed. Some scopes now have an integrated level sensor in them, which is nice. I believe the SIGs do. I think Leopold has one in their VX6 line and stuff that has that type of an anti-cant type of thing.
But again,
it's a must-have for if you're shooting at distance. You know, if you're dialing up for elevation, but then your scope is canted, you're actually dialing up
and to the right,
not as far because it's at an angle, and you're dialing off to the side, so you're gonna miss all over the place if you don't have some type of a leveling system. And you know, these MK machining ones, they're really nice. They're 3D printed. They have some aluminum ones too. They're really nice. They're cheaper. They're good if that's all you got. But I have had, you know, kind of sticks out on the sides. You can hit it and bump it, and then pretty soon you're like, man, it's off. So
there's some that you can get that are just right behind your scope ring mount right there, or something like that. There's a lot of different variations.
There's a ton of there's a lot like Tally. I think Steiner has some that the top portion of a ring can pop off, and there's a level there. Those are really nice to have. You know, something that's the Zeiss ones. They're kind of dummy proof, and they're not going to get bumped out of the way. Once you set your optic, you know, you got to level your optic to the level, and then after that, like the one on the stock, you got to level that. Then once it's set, if your scope doesn't move, then you're set. But it's an absolute must-have. Whether you're going to do an external one integrated into the stock or integrated into the rings, it's a must-have.
Absolutely. So that's some of the main physical features. Obviously, you could do an hour-long video on a bunch of these topics. So we're just kind of scratching the surface here to get you started in the right direction. Next video here, we're going to go into some of the optics, some of the features that you're looking for, like a side parallax or your parallax adjustment. You know, some of the optics with the reticles the options you have to select in your reticle, some of those types of things. So tune in for that. We'll drop that video here shortly and dive into some of the big things in optics in a rifle scope and some of the important things as well. So stay tuned for that. Drop some questions for us in the comment section there, as far as, you know, anything here that we've talked about, any of these scopes, who wants to have some questions on them, happy to answer them. Again, Roger has a ton of knowledge here as well, and he can definitely get us pointed in the right direction. So thanks for watching here today, and we'll see you for the next part.